Well, for 15 years now, I have been keeping the vows of a monastic. And I can't say that I've been a good monk, but I have tried my best. And especially in the last 3 years, then there have been a lot of challenges. And that's because it's very hard to find a valid context for being a monastic on your own, without the support of a monastery or a community. And don't get me wrong, I see it to be most excellent. But I would prefer to be able to do this in an authentic manner. And to tell you the truth, sometimes it has seemed completely pointless. Being the only monk in the entire area and being treated as something unusual, an anomaly in society. The purpose and intent of this tradition is important for the spread and propagation of the Buddha Dharma. But I'm finding it very difficult to believe that there is any way for this tradition to spread in the West. I mean, in the East, then monasticism is in severe decline. And even the largest monasteries in the Gaelic tradition in southern India are little by little losing their sangha. Every year, more senior monks disrobing and returning to a worldly life. And I don't think this is a fault with the Buddha Dharma. Also, it isn't a fault with this monastic tradition. But it's clear to me, fewer and fewer people these days are able to keep up their vows. And especially if you compare this to the time of the Buddha, then it's rare, almost impossible to find someone who is able to keep their vows purely. And we all know that when it comes to keeping discipline, then probably the Tibetans are amongst the worst of them. And it's not because they don't have a respect for the Dharma. It has more to do with their environment and their conditions. For example, nearly no Tibetan monastics keep the vow of not eating in the evening. And of course, it's not possible to go barefoot through the snow mountains of Tibet. And so similarly, there are challenges here in the West. And many people have tried to establish monastic communities here. It is said that there is some 350 Theravada monasteries in the States. And within those 350 monasteries, there's about 1,000 monks and nuns. But if you do the maths, what you realize is that's an average of about 3 monastics per monastery. Really, they're not monasteries. They're Dharma centers that have a few token monks and nuns. Some of these institutions in the West are doing better than others. For example, Plum Village is a shining example. And also the centers of the Ajahn Chah tradition of Thai forest monks. But in my mind, it's hard to imagine a potential future for this in the West, if not in the developed world in general. And without the support of a monastery and a monastic sangha, then likewise it's very difficult to produce learned and experienced practitioners. What I've been trying to do since I returned here to the West is find new ways in order to support sincere spiritual practitioners in their goal of achieving spiritual wisdom and developing insight. But in a society where less than 1% of the people are Buddhist, it's extremely difficult. And of course, within that 1% or less than 1%, then there are many different traditions. Vietnamese Buddhists, Thai Buddhists, Tibetans, Chinese. and they seldom work together. So for the last 3 years, then I've been doing my best. When I go out into the shops, in the street, I wear my robes, and of course, everyone's heads turn. Probably, when I first arrived here in Canada, then most people were suspicious or wondered what I was and what I represented. Many people thought I was a Hare Krishna. And I've done my best to represent Buddhist monasticism here in the West. And over time, then I think many people have come to see this to be something positive. But at the same time, they see it to be something separate. Something that they can't directly relate to. For example, you will all be aware that I am currently building a retreat center in the Northern Gulf Islands, British Columbia. And most people, when they hear this, what they imagine is a community of monastics. A monastic community living somewhere in an acreage on an island, and not something that they themselves could participate in. Likewise, when I tell people that I'm running a retreat, they also assume that this isn't something that they would be able to participate in. Even if they were allowed to, they assume that it's something that is beyond their reach. That somehow, in order to practice this path, you have to be an extremist. That you have to give up worldly life. Give up eating meat or eating in the afternoon. Keeping a vow of silence 24/7. And so they don't connect with the tradition. Well, I've come to the conclusion now that I can't do this anymore. That I cannot remain a monastic in this culture. It's not like there is no benefit. As I said earlier, I have great faith in this path. But I can't see any way in which that can propagate here in the West. And so I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And it's not a failing of the Buddha Dharma. It's not a failing of the monastic tradition. It's just because I can't do it. I'm not up to it. Part of the problem is that on top of trying to establish a hermitage here in British Columbia, I'm also looking after my parents. And this is very challenging. It's very difficult not to become burnt out in this process. And on top of this, trying to keep my monastic vows and conduct and even wear the clothes in public is adding an additional strain and burden that I, through my own weakness, am unable to bear. And so what I'm saying is that I am giving up being a monk and returning to lay life. But that doesn't mean I'm giving up on my plans. In fact, my plans are exactly the same. I intend to apply myself to develop a hermitage for sincere practitioners. But what I've learned is that basically all of those practitioners are lay people. And quite possibly the best way for me to relate to them and them to relate to me is if we are not different. Essentially, the external aspects are not important. The clothes you wear, how you keep your hair, what food you eat, these are not the most important thing. The most important thing on this path is your mind, your outlook, because everything comes down to mind. And if you have a good way of thinking, then it is inevitable that you will avoid negativity and apply yourself to virtue. And so what does this mean? Well, this means giving up the outer attire of a monastic practitioner. Returning to wearing everyday lay clothing. But does that mean that one is not able to practice the Dharma? I mean, many people say this. They say, I really like the Dharma. I think the methods are wonderful, but I'm not able to give up the world. I'm not able to become a monk and join a monastery. And indeed, that is what is taught in the Theravadan tradition, that unless you become a renunciate and go from the home to homelessness, then there is no way to achieve the state of an arhat. But this is not what is taught in Mahayana Buddhism. This is not taught in the Tibetan tradition. Because there, some of our greatest practitioners were lay people. And there is a strong non-monastic tradition. And so, I will abandon the outer attire of a monastic and take up the attire of a lay practitioner. When it comes down to it, is there really a great difference whether I wear a red zin or one that is colored in white and burgundy? What matters is your outlook, your state of mind. And especially in the Mahayana Dharma, then what matters is your intention and whether or not you have bodhicitta, that is loving kindness and compassion for others, placing others as being more important than oneself. The fact of the matter is, whatever you become familiar with, and likewise you become attached to. And I can't say that I'm not attached to the lifestyle and the attire of a monastic practitioner. But I do believe that perhaps I became a monastic in the first place for slightly the wrong reasons. I wouldn't say they were bad reasons, but they're not the correct reasons for becoming a monk. In general, as the basis of becoming a spiritual practitioner, then everyone needs renunciation, seeing the faults of samsara and wishing to transcend them. And when it comes to becoming a mendicant, that is someone who adorns the vows of personal liberation associated with the Theravadan tradition, then one has to make the commitment to abandon worldly life and go from the home into homelessness. And especially if you take vows. In actuality, there are hundreds of vows. And as I said, it's very rare to find people who can even keep the first order and second order of vows. I mean, the principal vows are pretty easy to keep in general, because it's not like we go out murdering people every day. But, for example, vows such as not eating in the afternoon, or not handling gold and silver, or never wearing the attire of a layperson, are ones that in general are difficult for monastics to keep. At first I had thought that those in the Theravadan tradition were much better in this regard, because they take these secondary and tertiary vows to be quite important. So for example, in the Theravadan monasteries, and they are quite strict about not eating in the evening. But what I come to understand is that when they come to the West, then for the most part, they lose these vows. They no longer keep them because it's not part of the culture. And that's an important consideration. If you were to ask me what my hope was, then I hope that monasticism and the tradition, monastic tradition, would take hold in the West. But to my mind, it's pretty much impossible. The great monasteries of Tibet and China were built based on royal patronage. In fact, in order to bring the Buddha Dharma to Tibet, the king not only gave up his own life, but all of his wealth. The translation of the sacred texts from India into Tibetan was done under royal decree, and in fact, they created an entire language in order to accommodate this. I mean, could you imagine the United States of America investing 20% of its GDP into promoting and propagating the Buddha Dharma? It's absolutely impossible. As I said previously, we need to find new systems by which we can support sincere practitioners so they themselves can develop insight, become learned in the Buddha Dharma. And sadly, unless we can find these systems, then, in my opinion, then Buddhism is doomed to failure in the West. And even if it doesn't disappear completely, then there's a great danger of the Buddhist teachings becoming corrupted. And in general, that's what's happening. People are picking out the bits of the scriptures, of the teachings that resonate with them personally, and discarding the rest, or mixing the Buddhist teachings with other concepts and ideas. And by this, then the pure Dharma can only be diluted and will eventually disappear. All that will be left is a semblance, the outer attire, the trappings of monasticism. But this is exactly what the Buddha predicted, that over time, the strength and influence of his teachings would wane. Like ripples in a pond, eventually they dissipate. The sad thing is, without the influence of the Buddha Dharma, without people dedicating themselves to altruism on the spiritual path, then our world is destined to become a dark and fearful place. So for my part, I will continue to do whatever I can to help promote the Buddha's teachings and also to encourage sincere practitioners in their quest for the development of insight. And this is the whole reason why I established the Insight Sangha, to find a way in which we could help those who want to dedicate themselves wholeheartedly to the spiritual path, unobstructed by the need to find resources for survival. But sadly, unless there are others who see this to be something important and are willing to come together to contribute their time and their resources in order to promote the spiritual path, then regardless of whether you wear a white and red Zen or a pure maroon Zen of a monastic tradition, whether your head is shaved or whether it's adorned with turquoise and coral, as the Tibetans are wont to do, then inside there will never be that transformation essential to achieving final awakening. And it is my wish that you too one day should find liberation, as did the masters of the past, and eventually achieve the state of a fully enlightened Buddha for the sake of all sentient beings suffering in the 6 realms of samsara. Now, I still have a lot of videos to be edited and released, and they were taken during recent retreats and at other times. And so in those, I will still appear as a monastic. But for now, I have given up the robes of a mendicant and returned to the life of a layman. Until next time then. See you later.